worn-out charm and creaky floors. It had become her sanctuary after a long day of work at the bookstore she owned. She hadn't paid much attention to the neighbors until that evening. The sound was so soothing, so perfect, that it drew her in. It wasn't the typical music she was used to. It wasn't the jazz she'd occasionally hear on the radio, or the classical she'd play when she was feeling introspective. It was something more raw, more personal. She found herself sitting by the window, eyes closed, letting the notes wash over her like an embrace. The next few days were the same. Every evening, as the night grew darker, the piano music would begin. Sometimes it was soft, sometimes it was bold, but always it tugged at something deep inside her. She was curious, but respectful of the fact that this was someone else's private time. Who could play like that? Who lived next door with such a secret talent? One day, after an afternoon of unpacking and cleaning her store, Evelyn found herself standing in the hallway, her hand hesitating on the doorknob of apartment 2B. She had never seen her neighbor, not once in the weeks since she moved in. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could hear the music up close, let it take her somewhere she'd never been. The door creaked open, revealing a dim hallway lit by a single overhead light. It was quiet now, too quiet. Hesitant, she knocked on the door. She almost regretted at the moment her knuckles tapped the wood, her breath catching in her chest. What if it was awkward? What if the person inside was nothing like the music? The door opened just a crack, and a pair of dark, almost melancholic eyes appeared, studying her silently for a moment before the man spoke. Yes. His voice was low, deep. He had a kind of magnetic presence, one that caught her off guard. "I'm Evelyn," she said quickly, a little out of breath. "I live next door. I've been hearing the piano, and I just wanted to say that it's beautiful." The man regarded her for a moment before stepping aside and gesturing for her to come in. "Would you like to hear it up close?" he asked, his voice rich with intrigue. Evelyn nodded, stepping inside. The room was small but cozy, with light pouring through the large window at the far side. A piano sat near the window, its wood polished to a deep shine. The man gestured toward it, sitting down at the keys without another word. For the next hour, Evelyn watched him play, his fingers dancing over the keys, his movements fluid, as if the music came straight from his soul. She was mesmerized, caught in the spell of each note, each chord. She had no idea who he was or what drove him to create such hauntingly beautiful music, but she knew she couldn't pull herself away. When the music finally stopped, Evelyn was almost afraid to speak, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the weight of something unspoken. She didn't know how to explain it, but something had shifted in the air. "You play so beautifully," she whispered, her voice soft. "I didn't know people still played like that." He smiled a little, though it was a reserved kind of smile, like he was sharing something personal, something he kept hidden from the world. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Evelyn," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "But I'm glad you like the music. It's the only thing I have left." Evelyn didn't press. She could sense the sadness behind his words, but didn't want to intrude. They sat in silence for a few more moments, the atmosphere thick with something neither of them wanted to name. Over the next few weeks, they began to spend more time together. It started innocently enough, with casual conversations about music, about books, about life. Every now and then, he'd play for her and she'd listen, losing herself in the melody. She was learning more about him with each passing day. His name was Daniel, and the more she heard, the more she realized just how much he had been through. There was a vulnerability in him that he kept hidden from the world, and for some reason, she felt drawn to it. One evening, after an intimate dinner at her apartment, they sat together on the couch, the dim glow of the streetlight filtering through the curtains. Daniel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a quiet gesture of connection. The touch sent a ripple through Evelyn, her heart racing as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. "I've never really told anyone about my past," Daniel said softly, his voice breaking the silence between them. "I've kept a lot of secrets, and I've kept them for a reason. But with you, it's different. There's something about you that makes me feel like I can let go of all of it. You make me feel like it's okay to just be. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her heart full of emotion. She didn't need him to explain, not really. She could sense the weight he carried. The pain, the memories, the regrets. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid of him or of what he'd been through. She only knew that in this moment, right here, right now, he needed her as much as she needed him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said quietly, her voice steady. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Daniel turned to face her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read the truth behind her words. Then, as if finally allowing himself to believe it, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, a soft meeting of lips, as if testing the waters. But then it deepened, the weight of all the unspoken things between them settling into that one kiss. From that night on, their connection only grew stronger. Daniel opened up to her more, bit by bit. He shared his darkest secrets, the pain that had shaped him into the man he was. And with each confession, Evelyn felt her heart grow even more entwined with his. They weren't perfect, neither of them were, but together, they found something rare and beautiful in each other, something that neither had expected, but both had needed. And in the end, the music that had brought them together, the secrets they had shared, became the soundtrack to their love story. A love that was as raw and beautiful as the notes that echoed to the quiet hallways of their building. The secret wasn't the music. It wasn't their pasts. It was a quiet understanding between them, the unspoken bond that held them together despite everything. And maybe, just maybe, it was the most beautiful secret of all. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet moments and stolen glances. Evelyn and Daniel began to shape a life together, each day offering new layers of intimacy they hadn't expected to find in each other. Daniel had his own scars, deep, old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But with each passing day, Evelyn became his safe place, the one person he didn't have to hide from. They spent evenings talking for hours over coffee in her apartment, laughing over silly anecdotes, and in the mornings, they would walk to the park nearby, their fingers intertwined, the world around them fading into the background. Sometimes they would sit on the benches in the park, and Daniel would pull out his worn notebook, scribbling notes, playing with melodies. She would watch him, marveling at the way his hands moved over the page with a quiet precision, as though composing music for a heart that had never quite learned to heal. Evelyn smiled, her heart full. She had never expected to be part of something so transformative, to be the one who helped him heal in the ways he needed. But here they were, standing under the stars, two people who had both come from difficult pasts, finding something beautiful in each other. As they walked back to their apartment, the world seemed to stretch out before them, full of possibilities. Daniel wasn't the same man he had been when they first met. He was still figuring things out, still coming to terms with the pieces of his past that hurt, but he was no longer hiding from them. And he no longer needed to hide from her either. It was then, in the stillness of the night, that Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her. His eyes were soft, full of something unspoken, something deeper than before. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "about what you said that night, that no matter what, we would face everything together. I believe you, and I want to tell you something. I don't want any more secrets between us. I want us to be everything, whatever that means." Evelyn's heart fluttered in her chest. She hadn't expected him to say those words, but now that he had, she knew they were both on the same page. There were no more walls between them, no more hesitation. The love they shared had become their anchor, and no storm, past or present, could pull them apart. "I feel the same," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere, Daniel. We're in this together, every step of the way." With that, they closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft and sweet, but full of the promise of everything they had yet to experience. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had found something rare, something worth fighting for. And in each other, They had finally found home. As they walked the rest of the way home, hand in hand, the world seemed to shift around them. The music still played in Daniel's heart, but now it was accompanied by a new, more powerful melody, the song of their love, one that would carry them forward together through whatever life threw their way. And no matter what happened next, Evelyn knew that their best-kept secret wasn't the past they had shared or the struggles they had overcome. It was a love that had blossomed between them, quiet and steady, until it became their very foundation. It was the secret they would carry with them, always. Evelyn didn't mind the silences between them. There were days when they simply sat together, not needing to speak, their bond growing deeper in the unspoken words, the shared looks, and the music that Daniel played late into the night. Yet, no matter how much they shared, there were still those pieces of his past that he kept hidden. He would speak of his family only in passing, a fleeting mention here and there, but never the full story. Evelyn didn't push him. She knew some stories were too painful to revisit, and she was content to wait for him to come to her in his own time. But one cold, rainy evening in December, as the world outside was cloaked in a soft haze of fog and mist, Daniel invited her over to his apartment. She had grown so accustomed to the sound of his music that the thought of stepping into his private world felt like an invitation into a secret she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. When she stepped inside, the atmosphere was different. There was a quiet intensity in the air, a feeling that something was about to change. Daniel was sitting at the piano, his fingers poised above the keys, but he wasn't playing. Instead, he was looking down at the black and white keys as if they held the answers to questions he had never dared to ask. "Evelyn," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I've kept buried for a long time." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, and she sat down beside him, her hand resting gently on his. She had learned to trust him, even with the unsaid things. "I wasn't always the person you see now," he continued, his voice tinged with regret. "I came from a family that wasn't kind. My parents had their own battles, their own demons, and I grew up in a house full of chaos. Music was the only way I could escape it all, but it wasn't enough. I thought leaving would fix everything, that moving away, starting over, would make the past disappear. But it doesn't. It never does." Evelyn's heart ached for him, for the pain that he carried. She could see it in his eyes, the weight of a past that wouldn't let him go, no matter how hard he tried. She wanted to hold him, to tell him it would be okay, but she knew that he had to confront his demons himself. "I don't want to be that person anymore," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I don't want to hide who I am, not from you. Not anymore. I love you, Evelyn, and I want you to know all of me. All the ugly parts, too." Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes, but they weren't tears of pity. They were tears of understanding, of acceptance. She leaned forward and kissed him softly, her lips gentle against his, conveying everything her heart couldn't say. "I love you too, Daniel," she whispered, "and you don't have to hide anything from me. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." For the first time, Daniel felt a sense of peace settle over him. There were still pieces of his past that needed to be mended, but with Evelyn by his side, he felt like maybe he could start to heal. He had carried his burdens alone for so long, but now he had someone to share them with. And in that moment, the music that had always been his refuge seemed to take on a new meaning. It was no longer just an escape. It was a bridge, a way to connect with the world around him and with her. As the night wore on, Daniel finally sat at the piano, his fingers moving across the keys with a newfound sense of freedom. The music was different now, more open, more vulnerable, like a confession whispered in the quiet hours of the night. Evelyn sat beside him, her hand resting on his, her heart full of love for the man who had allowed her to see the pieces of him no one else had ever seen. And as the music filled the room, Evelyn knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The secrets, the pain, the broken pieces, they were part of their story now. But so was the love, the trust, and the quiet strength they had found in each other. The best-kept secret between them wasn't the past. It was a love they had discovered in the most unexpected of places. And in that secret, they had found something worth holding on to. The months passed in a quiet, gentle rhythm. Evelyn and Daniel's connection deepened with every shared moment, every quiet conversation that unfolded late into the night. They were both healing, but the wounds Daniel carried were not something that could be erased quickly, no matter how much love and care Evelyn gave him. She never tried to force him to move faster than he was ready. She understood that healing was a process, a slow one, sometimes painful, but beautiful nonetheless. Evelyn had grown to understand the small, quiet things that Daniel did when he was struggling. The way his gaze would wander out the window when a memory overwhelmed him. The way his hands would tense before he started playing the piano. He didn't always speak of his past, but she had learned how to read him, how to offer him the space he needed while being there for him when he was ready to open up. One spring evening, when the world outside was blooming with new life and the air smelled of fresh rain, Daniel invited her to a small, intimate performance. It was a local venue, a cozy little jazz bar that had an old-world charm, with dim lighting and a stage tucked in the corner. The piano on the stage was the same one Daniel had played on so many nights, but tonight, it felt different. Tonight, it was his turn to share his music with the world. His way of telling the world his story and finally stepping out of the shadows of his past. Evelyn sat in the front row, her heart swelling with pride as Daniel took the stage. He looked nervous at first, his fingers hovering over the keys, his eyes scanning the small crowd, but then something shifted. As the first notes rang out, his body relaxed, his expression softened. It was as if he had surrendered completely to the music, allowing himself to be vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed anyone else to see. The performance was hauntingly beautiful, filled with raw emotion. Evelyn watched as Daniel poured his heart into each note, each chord, telling stories without words. It was as if the music was a language all its own, one that could express the pain, the joy, the love, and the grief that words could never capture. She knew, without a doubt, that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he allowed his music to set him free. When the last note faded, the room was silent for a heartbeat, and then the audience erupted into applause. Daniel stood at the piano, a slight, grateful smile on his face, his eyes scanning the room. But as his gaze fell on Evelyn, everything else seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them in that moment, connected by the music, by the love they had found together. After the performance, they walked outside into the cool night air, the stars above shining brightly in the clear sky. Daniel reached for Evelyn's hand, his fingers gently brushing hers, as if he were still trying to grasp the reality of what had just happened. "That was incredible," Evelyn said, her voice full of admiration. "You were amazing." Daniel squeezed her hand, but there was a softness in his expression, a tenderness that was new, even for him. "I don't know if I could have done that without you," he admitted quietly. "You've helped me find a part of myself I thought I'd lost forever. You make me believe in things I didn't think I was capable of believing in.